ever seen a woman wearing a sandal that is size 879? I bet you have. In 1865, a French law professor who greatly loved the democratic government of America held a dinner party in his home near Paris, France. Unlike France, America became a free country after its Revolutionary War. During this historic party, the professor, La Boulaye, along with French sculptor Frederic Auguste Bartholdi, dreamed of celebrating the United States' freedom by gifting them with a symbol of liberty. Creating and raising funds for this symbol of liberty would be a great endeavor. This small party gave birth to a colossal idea. Bartholdi, who was an amazingly talented designer from Paris, France, aspired for me to be a paramount symbol of freedom. Although he contemplated constructing me with a broken chain in my left hand, because of slavery in the recent Civil War, he decided to place the iron shackle under my feet to resemble statues of Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ, victoriously trampling the head of the sinister serpent. My gleaming torch would be held high to light the way to the glorious future for all immigrants who journey by the harbor. Lastly, he emphatically resolved that I should be standing to represent leadership instead of sitting, which would indicate worship. My creation was not without its challenges. It was imperative that I have a clever designer who could not only discover the correct materials to use for strength, but also for portability. Because there had never been a statue as humongous as I, my designer, along with many craftsmen, selected a steel skeleton with hammer copper skin for both its strength and portability. Gustave Eiffel, who built the famed Eiffel Tower in Paris, assisted Bartholdi with his monolithic monument. Eiffel's three main concerns regarding my structure were strength, battling temperature changes, and a fear that copper mixed with sea salt from the harbor could transform me into a big, bad battery. Of course, that fear never became a problem. Bartholdi was not only diligent regarding my design and production, he was also quite clever to inspire people to donate to his project. On November 6th, 1875, Bartholdi invited 200 of Paris's wealthy class to a fancy dinner party, which was held near the Louvre Museum. After giving an inspiring speech, he unveiled a plaster model of me. Even though the generous guest donated $25,000, he unfortunately still needed 10 times that much. In 1878, for Paris's Universal Exposition, Bartholdi had 13 hard-working horses, slaves to transport my hefty, huge head from Paris to the fairground. My head was showcased in the beautiful garden. Bartholdi's smart idea to charge people to climb to my crown raised a large amount of money. My crowded crown would hold 24 people all at the same time. In July of 1880, he had raised $250,000. His long labor in fundraising was complete. After many long hours of fundraising and tiring work, on October 28, 1886, on Bellows Island in New York Harbor, I was officially dedicated to the United States of America. Because I became a symbol of liberty to the entire world, in 1887, a sonnet written by Emma Lazarus was added to my plaque at my foundation. Her extraordinary words broadcast my message of freedom to the entire world. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest toss me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Everybody.
A life of elegance, a life of grace, a life of dedication. In July of 1929, I was born into a privileged family. Growing up, I had a little sister named Caroline, and my parents were John and Jane. Around the age of 1, my mother put me on a horse, and by the age of 11, I was winning national championships. Personally, I was a very avid reader. Before kindergarten, I read every book on my shelf. I attended Miss Porter's boarding school for girls, where I was very popular for my beauty. I decided to go to Vassar College, but finished up at George Washington University, where I got a degree in the arts. After a few years, I decided to accept a job as a reporter. Interviewing famous people and going to fancy parties was part of my job. At one of these parties, I met a stunning congressman named John. We were later married at St. Mary's Church in Rhode Island. After a few years, I had my first child and decided to name her Caroline, after my sister. My husband, who announced he was running for president, beat Richard Nixon and became the 35th president of the United States. 3 weeks after the election, I had my second child and decided to name him John Jr. My third child was born on August 7th. I decided to name him Patrick. But tragically, 2 days later, Patrick died and left me heartbroken. During our time at the White House, I had a mission to make my new home useful. So I put in a schoolroom and a treehouse to make my new home fit for a growing family. My creation was revealed to 56 million people which viewed the tour on television. Waving to large crowds and opening my home to others brought me great joy. In November, while attending a parade in Dallas, Texas, John and I were sitting on the back of a car waving to the roaring crowd. Out of nowhere, shots rang out and a blasting bullet had struck into my husband's head. He was later pronounced dead at the hospital. I laid him to rest at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. Although I never moved on from John's death, I later remarried to Aristotle Onassis, a Greek shipping tycoon who was 23 years my elder. Unfortunately, he died 7 years later and left me a widow for the second time. Eventually, I went back to work as a senior editor for the last years of my life. I died on May 19, 1994 in New York City at the age of 64 from cancer. Throughout my life, my devotion was to my family, my country, and making the world a better place. Who am I?
Have you ever met someone who has led hundreds of people to freedom? If the answer is no, now you have. As a young child, I was born between the years of 1820 and 1825 in Dorchester County, Maryland. The exact year of my birth is unknown. Being born to enslaved parents meant that I was enslaved too. Our family was severed when my 3 sisters were sold to a new family, leaving us heartbroken. As a young adult, unnecessary violence is part of a slave's everyday life. I recall as a teenager eyeing a slave trying to flee from his parents, or from his master. The angry master then fiercely demanded that I help restrain the slave. I bravely declined and was then struck on the head with a damaging metal 2-pound weight that was meant for the runaway slave. I suffered from seizures and headaches from that devastating injury. As a young adult, I was married in 1844 to a man named John. Even though my husband was a free man, I was still enslaved. 5 years later, after rumors being spread that I was going to be sold to a new family, I escaped slavery by fleeing to Philadelphia. Sadly, I had to leave behind my parents, siblings, and husband. I later returned for my husband and family, but my husband decided to stay behind. Over the next 10 years, I traveled to the South and made 19 noble trips and escorted over 300 people to freedom by the Underground Railroad. Years later, Lincoln was elected president and the Civil War began. I worked as a cook and nurse in the war. During the war, I also was the first woman to lead an assault where over 700 slaves were set free. After the war, I went home to New York where I remarried and adopted a sweet baby girl named Gertie. Later, my husband died and I continued helping others. Even though it had been years after my injury, I still suffered headaches and difficulty sleeping. I underwent brain surgery where I did not receive medicine. Instead of medicine, I chewed on a bullet like I saw the soldiers do in war. My health declined and I moved into the house that I donated for colored aged people. In 1913, I died over pneumonia and was buried in New York and with military honors. Who am I? Clint?
Harriet
Faith Tubman?
Yes.
Boom, pow, that's the sound of war. I was born in 1732 on my family's plantation. I was the youngest of my 6 brothers and sisters. My family and I lived near a swamp. I spent my childhood exploring the swamps, which included navigating the alligators and snakes that lived nearby. Around the age of 15, I was on a boat with 7 men, and suddenly something scary happened. The boat sank, but luckily we were saved by lifeboats, and I decided to join the military. I joined the French and Indian War and moved on to the Revolutionary War. My first mission was to build Fort Moultrie. I commanded the Battle of Williamsburg. I was a great soldier because I had the amazing ability to hide in swamps and British never catch me. My enemy, the British, nicknamed me the Swamp Fox. After war, I rushed home and sadly my house burned down, and I noticed that my slaves ran away to fight for the British. But I did not let that upset me. I got married at age 54 to my gorgeous cousin Mary, who was 49. I served terms in the South Carolina State Senate. I died February 27, 1795 of old age. My courage, my discipline, my sneakiness made me a great warrior and a great citizen for my country. Who am I?
Have you ever thought you would become a missionary to Indians? Most seem to consider Africa or South America these days, but in the 1700s, the Lord led me to become a missionary to American Indians. I was born in Haddington, Connecticut on April 20th, 1718. I was the 6th child out of 10, so we were a family of 12. Although there were many of us, we learned sorrow early on. I was orphaned at the age of 14. Because of my family's early deaths, I was more inclined toward depression. At 21, I became a Christian. I journaled about my conversion. As I was walking through a dark, thick grave, my soul was so captivated and delighted with the excellency, the loveliness, and the greatness and other perfections of God that I was even swallowed up in Him. The Lord brought me to a hearty desire to seek first His kingdom, to aim at His honor and glory as King and Sovereign of the universe. And my soul rejoiced with joy unspeakable to see such a God. At 20, a couple months after God revealed Himself to me, I entered Yale at the age of 21. I battled much sickness during my time at Yale with the measles and tuberculosis. In my 3rd year, I was expelled because I was overheard criticizing a tutor. I was brokenhearted and tried to return many times, even with the help of friends such as Jonathan Edwards and George Whitfield. It was no use. I was still rejected. Discouraged, I left. Yet, God had other plans for me. The Lord led me to become a missionary to American Indians. Although Yale refused to ordain me, the Presbytery of New York graciously did. Throughout my time as a missionary, I evangelized to 3 different tribes: the Housatonic, Delaware, and Cross-Weekson. As I started a school for young, eager Indian children and translated some of the Psalms into their language, the Lord even used me in converting a powwow, someone who is a witch doctor. Joyfully, my interpreter and his wife were the first ones I baptized. Within a year, we had 130 people in the church. Staying with the Cross-Weekson until my strength failed, I journeyed to spend my final days in Jonathan Edwards' peaceful home. I died on October 9th, 1747, at the young age of 29 years old. Why celebrate my life? I only ministered 4 years. Maybe it's a powerful testimony to the truth that the Lord can and does use weak, sick, discouraged, beaten down, lonely, struggling saints who cry to Him day and night to accomplish amazing things for His glory. Oh, I haven't introduced myself. Maybe you can guess who I am. Deacon?
George Washington.
Good try, but no. Uncle Nathan?
David Brainerd.
Do you have a favorite fairy tale? Do you enjoy movies that are based on books? At age 14, I began writing articles for a neighborhood newspaper my brothers and I published. Little did I know that I would go on to become a famous author. Unlike most children, I spent all of my time delightfully devouring distinguished literature. During my lifetime, I wrote 14 novels and one fantasy series. In addition, I wrote 41 other novels, 83 short stories, over 200 poems, and at least 42 scripts. I love children, I love telling stories, I love writing. Never could I have imagined that my childhood and career would fuel my creativity and imagination, enabling me to write one of the most famous and wildly adapted children's stories. I was born on May 15, 1856 in Chittenango, New York, in the midst of the diphtheria epidemic. Although I had been born with a defective heart, miraculously, I survived. This heart condition prevented me from playing the games that other children loved. Instead of jaunty physical play, I listened to the stories my mother used to read from the Bible, Brothers Grimm, and Hans Christian Andersen. Spending hours each day secluded with acclaimed literature thoroughly stimulated my imagination. As I mentioned before, I began my career when I was 14 years old. My countless source of jobs and life experience led me to write a series of books based on a fantasy world I called Oz. Creating the character of the great powerful wizard came from a compilation of characteristics I took from these marvelous men: Thomas Edison, P.T. Barnum, Rockefeller, and Swami Vivekananda, whom I met at the Chicago World Fair in 1893. My wife had a niece named Dorothy who died at only 5 months old from a very high fever. To console my wife, who was hysterically distraught, I began calling the main character of the Emerald City Dorothy. I wrote the Oz books solely for children's enjoyment. Due to the repeated requests of my readers, I composed 14 total books. The first book in the series was the most lavishly illustrated children's book ever printed. It was radically innovative. The book sold for $1.50 each and was the #1 picture book in the U.S., sold in the U.S. during the 1900s. After writing The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, I had no intentions of writing more books. I'm so glad my fans requested and at times demanded that I write sequels, because Oz became so much more than I ever dreamed. The fortune I acquired from the Wizard of Oz series enabled my family and I to travel around the world. But like Dorothy, it did not take me long to realize there's no place like home. Who am I?
Frank Baum?
Susie?
Is it Frank Baum?
Have you ever known someone that moved 9 times in 1 year? How about someone that persevered through many horrible years? Have you known someone that became a teacher while they were still a student? I'd like to introduce you to someone who knows all about these things. You see, that person is me. My childhood, career, and adulthood were full of sad events, but I persevered and actually outlived my entire family. This is my story as a pioneer girl who grew up to be a pioneer woman. I was born on February 7th, 1867 in Pepin, Wisconsin, to Charles and Carolyn, who I called Pa and Ma. I also had an older sister named Mary. When I was 4 years old, we moved to Kansas, where my sister Carrie was born. After her birth, we moved back to Wisconsin and then moved from there to Walnut Grove, Minnesota. Here we lived quaintly on the banks of Home Creek in a dugout, which is a home built into a hill. It was also here when my brother Freddie was born. Sadly, he died when he was 9 months old after suddenly coming down with a fever. During my childhood, many more sad things happened, including my older sister Mary having a stroke that caused her to slowly lose her eyesight. When I was 15, I was approached by a local man who offered me a teaching job. Accepting his offer would allow me to help raise money for Mary's college, so I apprehensively decided to do it. During this time, I fell in love with the man who would eventually become my husband, Almanzo, who I called Manly. We experienced a time of great joy when our daughter Rose was born. However, tragedy was on the horizon. I had a son who died before we were even able to name him. It was truly a low point in our lives. As you can see, my life was not an easy one, but I always remembered to count my blessings as I persevered. I had many things to be thankful for during my childhood, teaching career, and adult life, despite the formidable events that I encountered. I even buried Almanzo after 64 years of marriage. I am thankful for the family I had and adventures I experienced during my pioneer life. Who am I? Kayla Jean.
I don't know. Howdy, folks. Sometimes tragedy can change your whole life for the better. I grew up hearing tales of conflicts of slavery and Indian rights. These events in history changed my childhood, the legend I became, and how I shared my life with the world. In 1846, my family farmed in the Iowa countryside, as happy as pigs in mud. Tragically, my father died, speaking against slavery. Forced to provide for my family, I became a scout for the Army, always on the lookout for buffalo and attacking Indians. I killed 4,282 buffalo. And in fact, that's where I got my nickname. America was intrigued with the West. They couldn't get enough of cowboy and Indian fights, gold, and unseen landscapes. I love to tell stories, so when I met Ned Buttline, an author, he wrote a story about me. Although I had some perilous expeditions, Mr. Buttline added some details, making it some mighty fine tall tales. These stories turned me into quite the legend. I had the opportunity to share the West with other people. It showcased adventures of the West. It had sharpshooters, it had animals, it had death-defying stories that left people on the edge of their seats. My most popular shows included Sitting Bull, an Indian chief, Annie Oakley, a sharpshooter. Once even Queen Victoria joined us on the stage, along with over 1 million people as it traveled around the globe. So you see, losing my father at a young age, forced to find work, made me into a legend that still intrigues people today. In fact, I think I'm the most courageous person in history. Without tragedy, I would have not experienced those things. Who am I? Deacon. No, not quite. Hadley.
Buffalo Bill?
Yes.
Dear John, we are away from each other again. Sadly, I wrote this letter many times. Writing letters was always a passion of mine. Letter writer was one of my many roles from childhood to my time as a First Lady, and then into the times that me and my husband were apart. On November 11, 1744, I was born in the small town of Weymouth, Massachusetts. My father was the reverend of our church, and my mother was very well-mannered. We lived in a small cottage. Girls who were not allowed to go to school were taught housekeeping. I wanted to go to school very badly. I did not think it was fair that my brothers got to go and I did not. I was a shy, stubborn, and sickly little girl. When I was not sick, I would go to my grandmother's house a lot. She used to tell me wild colts make the best horses, to encourage me not to conform what everyone else was doing. Because I was sick a lot, my sisters ended up being my closest playmates and friends. When I was a teenager, I studied with a man named Robert Cranch. He visited my sister Mary often. One day, he brought a friend named John Adams with him. I did not take a liking to John at first because he was short, stubby, and a real chatterbox. I could tell he did not care for me either. Robert Cranch kept bringing John over to our house, though after a couple of years we got to know each other more and more. Not long after, we began planning our wedding. I wanted to get married in the spring, but the smallpox virus had broken out all over town. We ended up having a fall wedding on October 25th, 1764. My life as a First Lady was not amazing. I could not attend John's inauguration, which was a pity. I was worried that I would not be as good as Martha Washington. When we moved to the White House, I knew there was a lot of cleaning up to do. Washington was a terrible place. Cattle roamed the filthy streets. I was not impressed. I felt very sick and thought I was going to die. It took quite a long time, but my health was finally restored in the fall of that year. Soon after, in 1800, my son Charles died. Needless to say, my husband John and I were very sad. John only served as president for one term, and then we moved from Washington back to Massachusetts. John was in Philadelphia for 9 months, and while he was gone, war began. It was bloody, it was brutal, it was sad. In one of my letters, I wrote, "Please remember the ladies." While he was gone, I had to make a lot of difficult decisions for our family. It was very hard without my husband to help. I missed him so very much. As you can see, my life was filled with politics, letters, and family. My childhood consisted of spending time with my family and learning all that I could. My life as a First Lady was not what I expected, and marriage was sometimes difficult. Through all of it, God was faithful to me, and my legacy tells that story. Who am I? Greer?
Abigail Adams.
Yes.
Have you ever been to the most magical theme park ever? I have not only been to the most magical theme park ever, but I also created it. Throughout my childhood and my career, I was creative throughout my childhood and my career. On December 5th, 1901, I was born in Chicago, Illinois. When I was 4, we moved to Missouri Farm. I once rode a pig and things got pretty muddy. My brother, who was named Roy, often encouraged me to draw, although my dad thought drawing was a waste of time. I loved art. I often drew funny pictures and animals in the corners of my schoolwork. Once, my sister Ruth and I stuck big sticks into a bucket of black sticky tar and painted pictures on our White House. At the age 9, I got up at 3:30 a.m. and before school ran a morning newspaper out. Then I walked to school and then ran an evening newspaper out. When I was 15, I worked on a train. I sold snacks, I sold newspapers, I sold sodas. After working hard at many jobs and moving around, at 18, I bought a train ticket to Hollywood to pursue drawing. With everything in one suitcase and just $40, I moved to Hollywood. My brother Roy was living there too. Roy and I started Disney Brothers Studios. I made a new character called Mortimer the Mouse. My wife decided Mortimer wasn't a great name, so we changed it to Mickey. Mickey was a huge success. People wanted more Mickey. Steamboat Willie, an animated cartoon, introduced Mickey. It was the first cartoon with sound. And for the first years of Mickey Mouse, I voiced him. In 1933, I made the first full-length animated movie entitled Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In 1955, I opened my first theme park. But the first day did not go well. People waited in long lines in 100-degree weather, and some of the rides even broke down. I often disguised myself so people wouldn't know who I was when I meandered into the park. But even with the disguise, some people still recognized me. My childhood and career were full of creativity. If you ever go to the most magical theme park ever, where you will find Space Mountain, Expedition Everest, and numerous rides, take me with you. Who am I? All say it.
Walt Disney.
Seems uncomfortable. Come take it off.
Racing?
Oh,
Racing cars was how I initially started working toward my life goal. Intrigued by how machines work, I obsessively tinkered with engines. My friends and I worked and mold and construct the first race car. In the race, my car averaged 45 miles per hour. After winning my first race, I wanted to develop an even faster race car. Stubbornly, my wife would not allow me to race the next car. When the driver won the race, he set the record for the course, directly boosting my popularity and success, which allowed me to fulfill my dream. Let me tell you how my unique vision began. Even as a child, I had unique ideas. Born to a farmer on July 30, 1863, Dearborn, Michigan, I was the oldest of 6 children. Unfortunately, my father had a fervent dream for me to become a farmer. Although I love nature, I loathe farming and found it to be monotonous because I was a natural born mechanic who loved fixing things and making new machines. Farming would never be able to challenge me. My father joked I would do things the easy way. I ran away to Detroit at the age of 16, where I was apprenticed as a mechanic. Regrettably, I was fired from my first job because I wanted to change the way things were done. Continuing to design cars, I changed the way cars were manufactured, so it would be affordable for all people to own a car, from racing cars to the formation of factories, where cars could be quickly assembled. I spent my life tinkering with machines. My cars were cheap, my cars were plentiful, my cars were fast, my unique ideas changed the world. Who am I?
Harrison Ford.
Harrison? No, wrong. Deacon. Good.
Have you ever considered what it would be like to be kidnapped and forced into slavery? What if I told you that the slave was me and I eventually became a national hero? In the year 1789, I was born a proud member of the Lemhi Shoshone Indian tribe, also known as the Snake Nation, because we lived part of the year along the banks of the Snake River in what is now called Idaho. Our family retreated with the rest of the tribe into the Rocky Mountains during winter each year for safety. We lived as nomads and teepees. My noble father was the leader of our tribe. Winters were brutal, food was scarce, and we were so focused on survival. When I was 12 years old, a Hidatsu war party raided our camp and I was captured. The Hidatsu took me to one of their villages almost 600 miles away from my family and home. When I was 15, I was traded to Toussaint Charbonneau, a French-Canadian fur trader living in the village. In the bitter winter of 1804, the Corps of Discovery, which was formed to explore the 828,000 square miles of the land obtained the previous year on the Louisiana Purchase, reached the Hidatsu village where I was living with my husband. White traders like my husband in the camp were able to communicate with few men within the Corps who spoke French. The rest of the Corps members spoke only English. Lewis and Clark knew they would have to cross the Rocky Mountains to reach the Pacific Ocean. Horses would be critical to this mission. The best option for trading for horses would be with the Shoshone at the base of the Bitterroot Range. But no one within the Corps of Discovery spoke Hidatsu or Shoshone. My husband offered his and my skills to help translate during these crucial discussions. Lewis and Clark immediately hired us into the Corps as interpreters. Less than 8 weeks before we scheduled to depart, I delivered a child, a son named Jean-Baptiste. Although I traveled 10 to 15 miles a day with Jean-Baptiste strapped to my back in a cradle board, I still tried my best to prove a helpful addition to the Corps of Discovery. Once, while riding in a boat with several men and most of the expedition's supplies, a gust of wind knocked our sail so that we nearly capsized. Neither my husband Charbonneau nor most of the other men in the boat could swim, but I had grown up along the Snake River. Keeping Jean-Baptiste safe in one hand, I used the other to retrieve most of the items. Clark described this event in his journals, saying that in the boat were our papers, instruments, books, medicine, and in short, almost every article necessary to ensure the success of the journey. 6 days after this event, I was honored when Lewis and Clark named a branch of the river after me in appreciation. Later, when it was time to negotiate for the horses, I was a crucial link in an interpretation chain, English to French to Hadatsu to Shoshone and back again. Our expedition was able to purchase the horses we needed to cross the Rocky Mountains and reach the Pacific Ocean. Jean-Baptiste and I eventually covered 4,500 miles, and I fulfilled my commitment to the Corps of Discovery to help achieve the expedition goals. The Hadatsu slave I asked you about, who traveled with Lewis and Clark Corps of Discovery, would eventually become a national hero, was called Bird Woman by her people, but I am better known as Nora.
Sacagawea.
Take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never get back, let me root for the Dodgers. I was born on January 31st, 1919 in Cairo, Georgia, but was raised in Pasadena, California. While attending UCLA, I played football, basketball, track, and baseball. Then after a short time serving in the Army, I joined the Negro American Leagues to play baseball. Because of my excellent play in the Negro Leagues, my baseball career began. On April 18, 1946, I made my baseball debut thanks to Branch Rickey, a scout for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He discovered me while I was playing for the Kansas City Monarchs, which was a Negro League team. Rickey wanted to break the color barrier by getting a black player in the Major League Baseball. I was elated to obtain this outstanding opportunity. I started my career with the Brooklyn Dodgers on one of their farm teams, the Montreal Royals. During my first game, I had 5 at-bats with the first a ground out. Determined to improve, I collected 3 singles, a 3-run home run, 2 stolen bases, and scored 4 runs total. While playing on the farm team, the black sections overflowed, and on some occasions, fans had to be turned away. Because of my surprisingly superb success, I was promoted to the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. I wore number 42, played second base, and batted second in the lineup. My adept playing during the 1947 season earned myself the Rookie of the Year, and our team was the National League champs. 2 seasons later, in 1949, I won the National League Most Valuable Player (MVP) award because of my 342 batting average and my stolen bases. I was honored that year to be on the front of Time magazine. My baseball career lasted for 10 years. I was honored by being inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962 because of my lifetime batting average of .311. I died on October 24th, 1972. Then on my 50th anniversary of the start of my career, my number 42 was retired from all of Major League Baseball. Now on April 15th, all MLB players, coaches, and umpires wear number 42 in my honor. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the Dodgers game. Who am I? Hey! Branson.
Robertson.
Is it on? When I was a young boy, my mother sent me to school a year early. I loved it, and soon I became the best reader in class. My teacher's name was Becca Dickinson. At the time, my father was a preacher, and my mother stayed home with my siblings. As I grew up, I noticed that I was not being treated fairly. I had to use different bathrooms than other kids. I used different water fountains as well, and had designated schools, buildings, and even seats on the bus. One time, I went to see a friend, but was told we could no longer play together because we had different colored skin. Although my mother told me, "Son, you are just as good as anyone," I knew segregation must end to truly be free. I began college and followed in the footsteps of my father and became a preacher, although I originally did not want to. I married a woman named Coretta. I began giving speeches and leading boycotts and sit-ins. As I fought for justice and freedom, I did not fight with weapons, but rather used passive resistance, such as Gandhi had used in India. I was arrested too many times to count, but every time I fell, I got back up. My vision was to have equal rights, and I spent the rest of my life fighting for that vision. On August 28, 1963, I uttered my famous words, "I have a dream today. Who am I?"
Hey.
Oh my gosh. Okay, everyone.
Martin Luther King Jr.
I was born in the late 16th century, somewhere in Virginia. My father was an Indian chief who adored me. As I was growing up, I was taught skills such as planting and harvesting and gathering food for materials needed to build houses. I also learned how to cook and collect edible and useful plants from my father's tribe. In spring of 1607, a group of English colonists arrived in Virginia. Among them was Captain John Smith. John was later captured by my uncle and brought to my village. I vowed to my father that John was an amiable man and did not intend to cause conflict. My father released him back to the English. From then, my father and the colonists had a somewhat friendly relationship and would trade goods. In 1609, John returned to England for medical care. I was told that he died. After I turned 14, I had a short courtship with an Indian warrior whom I married. Together we had a son named Thomas. I still remained close to my father. At one point, I was kidnapped by the English and my husband was killed. While captured, I was taught English ways and their religious beliefs. I then married an English man named John Rolfe. While traveling the Thames River at the young age of 21, I became ill and died. Who am I? Lawson.
Pocahontas.
I was born in England in 1628. I have a brother named Lawrence, and my parents are Thomas and Margaret Bliss. After several moves, we settled in Springfield, Massachusetts. A few years later, my father died. On November 2nd, 1646, I married a man named Joseph. We had 11 children. Unlike my family, our neighbors, the Bridgmans, were struggling. I had several healthy children, while the Bridgmans had lost several children. While my family was prosperous, the Bridgmans were not. People in town started blaming me for the deaths and injuries that were happening. In 1675, I was sent to Boston at the Court of Assistance, where I was acquitted. 8 years after being acquitted, my husband, Joseph, died. For the remainder of my life, I dealt with the rumors of me being a witch. In 1702, someone told my grandson that I was a witch. I died in 1712 in Springfield, Massachusetts. Who am I? Israel? Anna?
Mary Bliss Parson.
What?
Mary Bliss Parson.
Have you ever wanted to be a nurse in a war? Have you ever wondered who founded the American Red Cross? That was me. Women's rights weren't really a big deal in my day. Women raised children and kept the house nice and tidy. That's pretty much it. However, this did not stop me from pursuing my interests. Oh no. I helped soldiers during the Civil War. I was a teacher, but my most notable achievement is that I founded the American Red Cross. This is the story of my life. I was born in North Oxford, Virginia on Christmas Day in 1821. My mother, who was a strong believer in women's rights, died a few years after my birth. My father fought in the Northwest Indian War for a long time. He loved telling me stories about the war, and I loved hearing them. I had 2 older sisters and 2 older brothers. My sisters taught me how to read and write, and one of my brothers taught me how to work with numbers. When I was 11, my other brother was helping someone build a barn, and he fell off the roof. He broke both of his legs and was sick for 2 years. I took care of him day and night until he was well again. After he recovered, my family enrolled me in Colonel Stone's High School. This is where I decided to teach summer school. I was very good at teaching school, and I loved it too. After summer school was over, I received many job offers, including an offer to teach a full school year. That was a big deal because in my day, only men taught full school years. I was so excited and accepted their offer immediately. As I was teaching, I realized that New Jersey did not have a free public school, so I decided that I would open one. Upon opening the school, children came pouring in. I had to open another school, which was a lot bigger than the first one. The school board decided that I could not run the school, so they hired a man. I was so upset that I left teaching behind forever. Civil War broke out soon after I quit teaching. Sadly, there were not a lot of doctors helping in the war, which caused more deaths. I had wanted to be a nurse on the battlefield, so I sent many letters to many important people asking for permission. They all said no, but I persisted until they finally changed their minds. After the war ended, I took a trip to Switzerland and learned about the International Red Cross. This was a society that provided help during war, natural hazards, and other disasters. Wisely, I decided that America needed something like this. After lots of hard work, I founded the American Red Cross. I have been through a lot, from teaching to war to founding the American Red Cross. I'm glad that I can help so many people and save so many lives. Do you want to help people like I did? Would you like to be a teacher or a nurse? I'm so thankful that I was able to help in these 2 fields. Who am I? Will. Yes, I am Claire Barton.